So I wanted to touch a little bit on the autopsy report. Did a little bit of a summary here just to get a base understanding about what some of this stuff means for my own understanding, because we've been going around talking about the situation outside of JonBenét and the players involved, and we're still looking through those things, but wanting to understand more about specifically what was done to the body of JonBenét. And so the first thing that is, we look at the overview and the cause of death. So the cause of death being asphyxiation due to wrapping the garrote around her, accompanied by a severe head injury. Key findings in that case going to be ligature marks around the neck and the wrist, skull fracture on the right side of the skull, bruising and hemorrhages in the brain and other body parts. There was no alcohol or drugs detected in the system, meaning that she was perfectly fine. And so dealing with very lightly the ligature marks, what I understand this to mean, or just trying to do a little research and combine it together, these are impressions or injuries left by a rope or a cord tightly wrapped around. And we're not just talking about loosely, we're talking about something tightly. I know we talked about, especially in some of the analyses that we've been looking at, we've talked about how the cord was loose around her wrists and things of that nature. But the marks come from something that's wrapped tightly. So it has to be, and I don't know who said it was wrapped loosely, but something that in order to make a mark, it has to be wrapped tightly. So at least in the neck area, I would feel like there was tightness. So we're indicating here something that was pulled tight, causing harm or restricting movement. So if we can imagine tying a string around somebody's wrist too tightly, that's going to leave a mark, especially if you're doing it around somebody, if you're tying something anywhere in the head, anywhere on the skin, especially if somebody bruises easily and you tie something too tightly. Once you tie it too tightly, you're going to see the marks. So it's going to leave a deep bruise. And in severe cases, it can cut the skin and restrict the blood flow. So anyways, skull fracture on the right-hand side, meaning that there was an actual break in the skull bone. Do you know how hard it is to break the skull bone? And so this is often caused by a hard blow or impact. This type of injury can lead to significant damage to the brain beneath the fracture. So something more practical is if somebody falls hard and hits their head on an object like the corner of a table or something like that, that results in this point of impact that really just causes severe damage to the skull. I remember, and it's hard because I remember I worked with this guy, and if I remember the story correctly, man, cool kid. I worked with him, but we used to go to this mall that was 2 stories high in the area, and the way he tells the story is he was upstairs on, and then have the balconies and stuff like that to where you can look over to the bottom. But the way he tells the story is that he was sitting on the edge of one of the, it's not a balcony, but the guardrails. And he was sitting over it, but his back was to the downstairs. His back was to the downstairs. And so he was just chilling. And you have this circular cylindrical shape that you're sitting on, and it's kind of slippery. And so the way he described it is that he slipped backwards. He thought he could just kind of, hold on. I don't know if his feet, he's a pretty tall dude. So I don't know if his feet came off of the ground at all, and then he just went too far back to where he just tipped his weight, or if his feet were off of the ground to where as he just did it as he was sitting, he just sat up there. I don't know. But he was pretty daredevilish. But anyways, the way he describes it is he slipped backwards and he fell to the second floor backwards and just like cracked his head a little bit. And he showed us picture to where he had the patch. He was in the hospital for some time. And I think it did affect in some ways his movement, because he said it was kind of like, if I talk a little slow, if I'm move a little slow, I'm thinking through it. And so anyways, we're talking about something very powerful that can fracture the skull, especially when it's hit against something, and something that can leave a mark. leave a mark. So I want to keep that in mind A skull fracture is something that can leave a mark. And then the bruising and hemorrhages in the brain and other body parts. Bruises are areas of bleeding under the skin or inside the body caused by this blunt force trauma. The hemorrhages in the brain indicate internal bleeding due to trauma, which can cause damage to the brain tissue. And in a more practical example, thinking of a severe car accident where someone hits their head on the dashboard, which could cause the brain to shift inside the skull, which could lead to internal bleeding, bruising on the body from a seatbelt or impact, something like that. So far from the page one overview, we're getting something in terms of her body, in terms of JonBenét's body. Something was very violent, something very traumatic. We're not just talking about somebody hit her with a stun gun and she fell and it's like, oh my God, how could I? And they got up and ran. No, whatever was happening was a situation that was going on because her body is bruised from it. We talked about in the last video that there was no defensive wounds on her part. So if we're trying to think about a fight that happened, there was no fight or no ensuing struggle that she was able to interact with the person. But yet we find damage to her body so far in terms of her arms and her wrist being bound, in terms of stuff around her neck area, and then damage to her skull and bruising on her body and in her brain. So there's a lot of damage going on there. Going to the second one, observations at the scene. She was found in the basement of her home, lying on her back with a blanket and sweatshirt covering, a deal and some long johns and stuff like that. Cord tied around her head area and wrist. And I'm censoring myself just in case you're wondering why. I'm censoring myself. Her head area and her wrist. Dried blood and other stains were found on her clothing, of course. And I think they said inside of her undergarments was some dried blood. Bruises and abrasions were noted on her face, neck, and her body. So if we just initially deal with the scene description, she was covered up. And I think they said I'm kind of confused. Help me in the comments. I'm kind of confused. Was she covered up when they found her, or did they go and get a blanket out of the washer or the dryer, or out of the dryer to cover her up? I'm confused. Was she covered up? Because I thought that she was covered up when they found her. That's what I'm confused about. Was she covered up when you found her? I don't understand. And 3'9", 45 pounds. She was very light. You could carry that easy. Some jobs, they ask you to carry 50 up to 50 pounds. And you put that on your shoulder and man, you're done. You're good to go. So if you think about the covering up, it's indicative of somebody trying to seal something up. They're trying to conceal it. So that might be suspicious, because we're talking about in crimes where there's no relationship, we're talking about an individual who would commit the crime and go. But in crimes where there's some sort of intimate relationships, a lot of times there would be concealment of it. And of course, if they found her after the case, then after the fact, and they didn't want to see it, we would assume that they didn't want to see it and see the horror that was in front of them. They would cover her with a sheet. No argument there. Sure. But the cord being tied around some of the cords on her body, this suggests that she might have been restrained again at some point. So there's restraint there. And so we picture her sort of there's a tight cord around her wrist. So again, restrictive. And also too, very deliberate. When you do something like tie something around somebody's wrist or their head region, this is deliberate. You're trying to, with visible impressions, this a lot of times I think points to somebody trying to control or force something. So if we walk very slowly, there's a lot of damage to her body, and there are indications that she was possibly trying to be forced to do something or controlled. This bodes well for the intruder theory, of course, because they would want to try to force her or control her. But in what context would she be forced or controlled? Where would she be forced or controlled? Because if I stun you if I come up to the bedroom, I'm waiting outside of the bedroom, I think as some reports have put it, if we go off of that sort of assumption, and I'm waiting outside of the bedroom as the intruder, I go in, I pick you up, and maybe you're and I have the gun, the stun gun, because I know you might wake up, maybe you won't, but I have it and I'm ready to use it. So as soon as you start shaking off the cobwebs and you come to, then I have the stun gun to shock you for 15 seconds. And we would have to assume that that would knock you out. We would have to assume not knock you out, because I was trying to do some research to try to see, could a stun gun subdue? Because the word or the language used around this intruder is that he used the stun gun to subdue her. And so I wanted to do a little research on that. And from what I was looking at, the stun gun wouldn't subdue anyone. It may be, except in extreme cases, the stun gun wouldn't subdue anyone. It would just shock you, maybe about 15 seconds. And even then, what the research was saying is that even then, that wouldn't stop somebody from screaming out. For 15 seconds, you'd come to, because you're coming from the second floor. If I pick you up out of bed and I assume that you're asleep the entire time, maybe, depends on who she thought was picking her up, and maybe she was cool, but maybe she came to and she started blinking her eyes, and then she opened her eyes up and was like, hey, you're not my mom, you're not my dad, I don't know who you are. And then she was like, and because kids get real funny if they don't know you. But anyways, so this kind of raises questions. Somebody's natural human response is to cover you up, conceal you. And then, well, first of all, we know that before she was restricted. Blood stains in her clothing. So we know that there was some sort of injury again that happened inside of her clothing. Some sort of physical trauma there. And again, I'm censoring myself. And so the fact that the blood was dried lets us know that some time had passed. So if we look at the data, I think there's an article that talks about drying of blood stains, but this is talking about indoor surfaces, but we'll use it roughly, trying to understand how long it takes blood to dry on clothes. So as a rule of thumb, it says here, wiping a typical small blood droplet will not lead to a visible smear, but after a time period of approximately 60 minutes, maybe somewhere between 60 to 75 minutes, at an average room temperature of about 20 Celsius, that's about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, we can expect there to be drying of blood. So if we look up the temperature in Boulder, Colorado on December 25th and 26th of 1996, on December 25th, we have a high of 54 Fahrenheit and a low of 24. And on December 26th, we had a high of 51 and a low of 6 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's pretty cold on average. So that could get us to our about 68 degrees Fahrenheit that we're looking for the blood to dry. So I guess what my point pointing that out is that blood was just chilling in there, just taking its time to dry up. So you basically left her down there. She was left down there long enough for the blood to dry, which again doesn't really negate the intruder theory if we're just looking at that situation or of events alone. If we're just looking at that, but it told me that she was there long enough, which would also go to Patsy being asleep, waking up in the ransom note, John going down later on in the day, plenty of time for the blood to dry up. But whatever we're talking about, when investigators found her, whatever the case was, she had time to lay there, is I guess what I'm getting at. And so that gives us an indication about that blood being dry, gives us an indication about how long ago that injury occurred, is that it was dry. So she had been there for a while. And then the bruises and abrasions on her face, neck, and body. And these kind of bruises, physical impact or rough handling, you get from something from rough, like few nails or something like that. You can only break your nails if you're doing something rough with your hands, like then you're to break. So we're not just talking about, and the thing about it is we're not just talking about one isolated mark. We're talking about face, neck, and body. Like, again, the of all her body, her face, her neck, her body, her arms, her legs, her back. We're seeing abrasions all over her body. What can have sort of like on the body? That's where I'm trying to understand, like, what event, I'm trying to isolate it. What event can have some sort of whole focus on her body to where it impacts her? She's not fighting back. She doesn't have any defensive wounds or anything in her body. She's not putting up, like, she's not to stop anything. She's not doing anything. So she doesn't have any defensive wounds as somebody sort of coming toward her. And this is why it has to be somebody that she knew, because and be some random person, because this is somebody that could come toward her and she wouldn't defend herself against them. This is somebody who could handle her and she wouldn't put her, defend, put her hands up or be like, stop, ooh, leave me alone. I believe this is somebody who had to get her in a compromising position to where then she said, wait a minute, something's going on that I don't like. I don't know maybe what's going on with the rest of everything that's happening to me, but I'm getting uncertain about it and I don't know. Judith Phillips in the American Murder, she said JonBenét was very, very playful, kind of like a practical jokester. She'd like play little tricks and stuff like that and mess with you, which is on par with JonBenét's attitude. She's a diva, world centers around her, but she's so multifaceted that she play and joke around and be lighthearted. But the sort of, when she, talks feeling pretty, that dark part comes in where society has her. That's a societal implementation into life. So that response comes from something in society, from external. And so there's so much multifaceted. I call it, there's so much depth. I'll call it depth. There's so much depth to JonBenét that I'm trying to fit her actions into this scenario. So the fact that there are abrasions on multiple parts of her body, front and back, in multiple areas, is kind of alarming a little bit. And so something practical could be thinking about you falling or fighting someone and you're pushing and you're hitting. Of course, you won't just see like a mark in an area. If you're fighting, well, that makes sense then. If you're fighting with someone, there's like pushing around, then there would be room to get like these random on your body that you don't even know about. Hit some sort of surface. You get some marks on your neck from pulling and this and that and the third. So it's possible. It's feasible. Okay, I'll go with that. And as we've talked about before, moving on to say page 3. Yeah. If we think about the cord tied tightly around her head area, attached to a broken wooden stick, suggesting it was used as a garrote. Blonde hair was found entwined in the knot. Abrasions on her cheek, shoulders, lower back. Marks consistent with petechial hemorrhaging. Small blood vessel ruptures around the eyes and the neck. Looking at blonde hair, so I think her hair was blonde. I think because there was talk about maybe dyed her hair or something like that. But like I said before, I think in the other video, I'm thinking that the knot was tied so tight that it pulled into her hair. I think it was more so accidental in terms of it grabbing her hair. But still, we can think about tying a knot so tight as we've done before that it grabs and strands of hair. Yes. Gets tangled in your hair. Yes. But there's so many things and as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the scream. I'm trying to understand what would have caused the scream. There's so many things that could have caused a scream because you have this cord around her so tight that it grabs her hair unintentionally, probably. But when you do it, because was the garrote was it like a adjustable in a sense that can get tighter as you pull? That's what I'm wondering. And then the stick, you pull the rope through because this requires construction. You pull the rope through and then you tie it up around the stick. Or as we said before, you tie it up in a way that can pull out the hair, but then you unlatch that and say, oh, that's not going to work. Or maybe it comes out. Maybe you tied it up and said, okay, I have a circle here at the bottom. This is the main noose hole, but then I tie it here and it also grabs the hair. But when I'm pulling or whatever I'm with this garrote, when I'm pulling it or whatever, it breaks or snaps and pulls hair with it. And when it does that, now I got to attach on sort of to maintain control. But I weirdly, or I guess because there's already hair in the knot that you've tied for that part, you can just slip the stick through it and then tighten that part around the stick, but the hair stays. But nevertheless, we're still talking about some sort of force. Cord being tied tightly around her head area and attached to a broken wooden stick. And I'm trying to understand, because there was some sort of leverage being done with the stick. And I don't know how much, if we're talking about, again, that you can pull up on. We're talking about an adjustable noose that you can pull up on. Interesting. But it's still used to apply some sort of pressure. I'm hanging on to that. So we have this noose, in a way, I'll call it that. And we can use this string. It's almost like a puppeteer, in a way, I would say. Kind of something like this. You have these very puppeteer kind of strings, in which kind of something, in more so in John's case, but something that very controlling. It's like, so be the scenario in which somebody needs to be controlled, I guess. And if somebody is being controlled, that indicates to me that there was some sort of interaction for the controlling. If JonBenét was alive and well and she was awake, then there was a conversation. There was an interaction. And conversation, by conversation, I mean there's been a verbal and nonverbal interaction. Came up to where they can fashion. You have enough time, because I don't think that garrote was there before, but it's something that you've taken the time to fashion. It is that you've been sitting around and you've the time to fashion as sort of like an exchange of, if you imagine you and your sibling sitting down somewhere and maybe you guys are coloring in a coloring book, you have yours, they have theirs. So you guys are coloring in your colors and theirs. And so you're just kind of working and you're talking, hey, why are you using blue right there? Hey, can I borrow your yellow? It's that. So there has to be an extended interaction that leads to this moment. It can't just pop out of nowhere, I don't think, when I'm looking at all of this. Because as we're walking down this, and this individual doesn't have control, but then they gain control. How do we get to the point to where I'm fastening a garrote into several ways and I'm moving it and evolving it in different ways? How do we get to that? Because I got my first revision, I got my first draft of my garrote, which maybe was tied together without, or fashioned without the wooden stick. But then I go and break the wooden stick to say, I need this really quick. I think that action was a very quick action. Oh, I need this part very quick. Boom. But that's from Patsy's art supply box. That's somebody who is not concerned with getting in trouble with Patsy. Because why would you break my art stuff deliberately unless you did it by accident? But this suggests more deliberate action. I'm going to pull from something I haven't covered here, but I've researched because the autopsy report covers it somewhere. They found wooden material, I think, in JonBenét's body. And you know what? I'll pull it up. So just looking at a few articles. This one was Denver 7 ABC. The JonBenét Ramsey case, according to Burke Ramsey, 70 points. Burke Ramsey says prove his innocence. Goes on to detail it here by Mark Belcher. This was in 2016. Been 20 years. It's been about 20 years since the murder of JonBenét. Starting to get attention on the case again. Burke Ramsey is among one of the people getting attention. He maintains that he hasn't done anything to his sister. He's not responsible for it. And he's taken to court every media outlet that has run with the story pointing a finger at him. And as we know, he successfully settled outside of court. Of course, we talked about the $750 million lawsuit. I think 500 in punitive damages and 250 and something else. I can't remember. So his legal team has been able to prove their points with the 12-page list of what they call key facts about the murder of JonBenét and the law enforcement investigation. He has maintained his innocence, and he says these facts support his claim, and they are as follows. So I'm going to scroll down to the points that I wanted to make. And so here, starting at about point 56, other DNA evidence of the on JonBenét was sourced from an unidentified man, Caucasian white male, match any body in the home. Multiple pieces of DNA were linked back to unidentified male. Medical examiner, of course, says she died by asphyxia and she was alive when this was happening. There are physical findings on her body that strongly suggest that she struggled with her attacker, was conscious at the time that she was garroted. Now, struggled with the attacker. Again, I don't know what they mean by that. If there was a struggle, I don't agree with that. But if there was a struggle in which you're trying to get away from you, or I'm trying to whatever, I agree with that. In addition to that struggle, the Ramsey family said JonBenét had burn-like marks on her face and back consistent with a stun gun. Wood fragments from the used to create the garrote were found inside of JonBenét Ramsey, leading the family and the investigators to believe that she had been assaulted. JonBenét's body showed signs of 63. JonBenét's body here says shows signs of damage to her body in her private areas that was caused bleeding. And so the bleeding that we know comes into play when it goes into her. I'm going to pull up the next one. And this kind of a little bit about, and this is coming from Denver Post staff writer, evidence. There's a lot of evidence, but it's tricky. Point, October 14 of 99. They're not even sure how she died or when. So kind of down. I thought this point was interesting. Handwriting experts from CBI eliminated John Ramsey as notes author, but they couldn't do the same for Patsy. This was in 99. Now, still have analysis that I'm doing. I'm going to release on the deposition. There's is arguing about the ransom note, but I was looking for evidence that this stuff had come out to talking about the note. And so here in 99, 2 years before 2001, we see that handwriting experts, saying that nobody credible. And here we have handwriting experts, and we're not just talking about Sina Wong or anybody else from Mr. Hoffman. We're talking about handwriting experts right here from the CBI. And this is the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Eliminated John Ramsey for sure. Couldn't do the same for Patsy. Although they collected at least 5 handwriting samples, along with historic samples of things she wrote before JonBenét's death, they could neither eliminate her as a writer nor say definitively that she was. Chet of the CBI wrote one of her samples that this handwriting showed indication that the writer was Patsy. This is the CBI. This is the Colorado Bureau of Investigations that is saying this, not Sina Wong. Indications that Patsy was the writer. And I'm just saying this in passing, but I saw this and I was like, well, dang. Told investigators that samples that she gave do not suggest the full range of her handwriting. So basically what he was saying is, we got some stuff, but we don't think this is enough to give us any evidence to make a decision. So we need more, is essentially what he's saying. And I also saw this, according to Detective Linda Arndt, who witnessed the autopsy. Green Christmas garland, like garland decorating the spiral staircase in the house, was tangled in her hair. How did that get there? How did she get the green garland that was on the staircase in her hair? It becomes important in this case because I'm trying to understand, happened. Because I would speculate that the garland was on the ground. We probably not the case that she was, and maybe she had 2 ponytails, and maybe it's the case that as she was walking down the stairs to the basement or going down the stairs to the basement, she was doing like this or something like that. And then it was whatever. And the garland got in there. And so it just kind of throughout the night with whatever struggle ensued. However, the garland could have been on the ground, like speckles of garland could have been on the ground. And so again, were the garland speckles close to the staircase, or had they traveled away from the staircase? How can the speckles of the garland that are at the staircase get into wherever she was, over by the wine cellar? And that's what I'm saying. We talked about the previous episodes, the moving of the golf clubs and from what it looks like. But now we're seeing that there's garland, as Detective Arndt puts it, that's on the staircase. How is that ending up in different places around the house in terms of the basement? There's like moving going on. There's some stuff that's being manipulated. Was wearing her long underwear. I think it's long johns. Beneath that, some legitimate underwear, was a pair of white underwear. Again, I'm censoring myself, with printed rosebuds and the words Wednesday in the waistband, which Patsy said they went to New York and bought. There were 1 or 2 packages, she said. There were urine stains and several red stains, according to the search warrant affidavit. Dr. Mayer told Arndt stains look like blood. Now, Dr. Mayer is the autopsy report specialist, think that actually did it. I'm going to look specifically at the autopsy. But Mayer evidence of injury, but no from a male, was on the body. So the coroner also reported that the private appeared to have been wiped down with a cloth. So JonBenét's body, that area, had been wiped down with a cloth, or appeared to, according to the coroner, which to me suggests some sort of tampering again with her body, as other reports have indicated. Some other experts have talked about there was evidentiary signs of redressing the body, which means if there was signs that the body was redressed, and there was a hole in the Wednesday garment, I'll call it that, there was a hole in the bottom of the Wednesday garment, that would indicate to me that she was laying somewhere, or she was somewhere in which the intrusive action happened and the Wednesday garment was ripped. And so she was laying somewhere. We got the urine stain, and the red stains, though, could have been, because the stains could have got on there, but can't change that. You can't change the red stains. Maybe the stains were overlooked of some sort. But if we're talking about redress, then that might indicate that there was more blood. And if there was more blood, then that would make sense that and it was coming out, then that would make sense that you wipe it off and clean it up. Because there were urine stains, did report that it smelled like urine. Because the body was there long enough for rigor mortis. Did anybody report smelling of urine at all? Because there needs also see the urine. There needs to be a sensory smell of the urine as well, unless she's eating super healthy foods that make the urine smell. Could be the case. That happens sometimes. But I would figure as a young 6-year-old child with McDonald's around, she would be eating unhealthy foods. And so the would have a smell, and you would smell it when you go down into the basement, when you get over there. And the point that I was making the other moment about the blood stains drying up, if basement window was cracked, it would have been super cold down there. If John had actually broken the window, as he was saying, it'd have been super cold down there, because it was 54 degrees. And that would have come right down into the basement. So it'd have been cold down there, which would be why she would be wearing long johns, because long johns are designed to keep you cool. Also, too, this is what I'm a little confused about this. If it's 54 degrees, if it's vacillating between 54 degrees at the high and 24 at the low Fahrenheit, even vacillating between 51 degrees and 61 degrees, coming into the basement, and the stairs from the first floor down to the basement did not seem to have a door going down to that basement. then the cool air would work upward at least into the kitchen. And I would think maybe Ramseys are too rich. They were too rich to even care. But that was a sizable hole. And I would think that the air would be working its way up to in part to the kitchen. So you would want to get that fixed. And if John would have broken the window, I would have thought he would have called somebody relatively immediately. Knowing the way that they probably work, they would have seemed that John would have called somebody relatively quickly. Like, hey, broken window getting inside the house. Could you send somebody? And that's why I'm concerned that it's possible. I'm speculating that it's possible that that window was not broken by John prior to this event. Number one. Number two, if we remember back, if you look at close-ups of the window, and of course you see the cobwebs here, but in real time, you saw kind of right here, which might indicate that there was cobwebs in this area. In the real-time video, there were cobwebs in this area that when it was busted open, they didn't leave. Got a little bit of cobwebs right there. So the cobwebs held on through whatever break. And because something of this magnitude that's wide and you're going downward, I don't know how he broke it, but downward in, because this is somebody who's reaching in with their left hand to get that lock. That lock is somewhere down here. So whoever did this had to go down in like that to kind of block. Okay. You can see it right here. Those cobweb is hard to see, but it's kind of right there. It's kind of waving. Yeah, you see that movement? It's kind of wavering. So, like I said, that's a pretty big opening. But anyways, that would lead me to believe that there's some dishonesty going on with how everything is shaping up in the basement. But anyways, continuing with the analysis, this was Ramsey case. Plaintiff here, I think, is Christian Wolf. And I think was this the fact finding from the depositions. This was the point of the fact finding from the depositions in which Mr. I think was working toward. If I'm correct, this is March 31 of 2003. And this the file draft, I think. JonBenét Ramsey and Patricia Paul Ramsey, Robert Wolf, the plaintiff. And it's about 36 pages. This comes from Justia Law. And I'm just going to kind of where I want to be. And I had to go through this extensively to make sure that it was child safe. Discussion about Bill McReynolds doing it. Now, say this about that, like that's messed up. All individuals that, are frequenting, Fleet White, and for them to just, for them to just throw these people under the bus is just tough. Like, you're crazy. Okay, this is where I was trying to get to. Consideration of Epstein's testimony that there were similarities between Miss Ramsey's handwriting and the ransom note. Going down here straight to the point, other physical evidence is consistent with the theory that an intruder was in the home. There was recently made shoe print in a moldy area in the basement that matched no owned by the Ramseys. There was no palm print on the door to the small room where JonBenét's body was found. There was also a palm print. Okay. No, misread that. There was also a palm print on the door to the small room where JonBenét's body was found. Did not match the Ramseys' prints. Evidence was further consistent with the possibility of an intruder, as JonBenét had DNA of an unknown male under some of her fingernails and on her underpants. The evidence also indicated that JonBenét had been assaulted and her private contained wood fiber from the paintbrush used to fashion the garrote. I also like this report. February 15, JonBenét Ramsey was the apparent victim of a forceful attack in the minutes before she was murdered. Attack that left her body scraped and bruised, according to a partial autopsy report released Friday by Boulder County. This is February 15th. By a Boulder County judge during his December 27 autopsy. On the 6-year-old, Boulder County Coroner John Meyer found scraping and swelling of the child's private area, as well as a series of scrapes on her back, on her right shoulder, left lower back, and left lower leg. Sheila Rappaport, a Denver prosecutor who tries individuals accused of this assault or killing children, said such patterns, such indicative of a forceful attack, which is what I'm starting to believe. There was about this. She said that the scraping of JonBenét's back may have been caused. Helpless child lay on her back and was assaulted by her killer. JonBenét could have been moved about by her attacker, causing the scraping. Rappaport said there would appear there is some trauma to the back area, and one could hypothesize that it was inflicted during the course of her abuse, said the prosecutor. I would assume that there was some movement or pressure, force that caused that, especially when we are talking about scraping. Usually there is some movement involved there. Rappaport said that without knowing the severity or size of the abrasions, it would be difficult to say the degree of the force used. Obviously, there was force used and mistreatment, but in terms of the degree, be hard pressed to say. A groat was used to subdue JonBenét. I'll just say it like that. The subduing method, scrapes on her neck and bleeding in her neck and her eyes. Autopsy shows that, according to the report released after the Denver Post went to court seeking to have it unsealed. Meyer noted that the child had scalp bruising and bleeding in the brain, indicative of her being struck over the head. Rappaport said that she often sees these types of injuries in this kind of assault intrusion, is what I'll say, reported on JonBenét. This is not to have these types of injuries and this type of abuse, to find these two together, she said. So that's interesting. So anyways, moving on. But getting back to our original point that we were trying to make is that this suggested to me a more intimate and more time being needed to fashion this and apply it to JonBenét. Then we see the marks consistent with the petechial hemorrhaging, small blood vessels, ruptures around the eyes and the neck. And petechial hemorrhaging is indicative of, these tiny happen when, blood vessels are bursts, or they're like this extreme pressure, almost like we talked about, you're applying a lot of pressure around the neck and it's increased pressure. So somewhere along the line, this cord caused increased pressure as Oregon is getting their behind handed to them by Ohio State handily. But an example, this could probably be like, this is a good example too. Say like you're squeezing a balloon too tightly. And so like you kind of these on the surface. And so this is kind of similar to when blood vessels begin to burst when there's pressure applied, and especially applied to the point to where it starts to show up in your neck and your face. So this is somebody that wasn't pressure there, but then there was a lot of pressure. And I'll analysis here, and then I'll come back to kind of dive into about her general examinations. So stick with me. Be right back. Like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think this far. Until next time, get easy.